Welcome back to the Rock Your Comeback podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Eaton. And today I have a really special guest, somebody who has been inspiring me for a couple of years now. I'm here with Jamie Varon. She is the author of the nonfiction book, Radically Content, as well as her latest fiction novel, Main Character Energy. She's also an executive producer, designer, digital course creator, pretty much all the things. And I'm ecstatic to have her here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to chat.
I'm excited. I've been following you for, a couple years now. And one of the things that drew me in is just your blurbs on life. I'm curious where you started that account and where that has grown for you.
I think I started posting on Instagram maybe, I would say 2016, 2015. And everyone at that time was putting these like super filtered images and all this stuff. And I was like, this is just not my thing, you know? And so I decided, I was like, I'm just going to put text, white, like black text on a white background and just call it a day. You know, it didn't really take off. I have had an established audience for quite a long time. I've been putting my work on the internet since I'd say as early as like 2008. So it wasn't like I had nobody, but it didn't really start totally taking off until 2021. So, it took a while for, some of the things that I was talking about, especially in 2016, about not putting your well-being over productivity or, having balance. People were not into that message at that time. It was kind of once the pandemic hit, they were like, whoa, where have you been? And I'm like, I've literally been sharing my work online for 10 years, but welcome. So it's just kind of organically grown. I try not to do things like everybody else does things. And I think because of that, you end up having to accept that maybe growth is a little slower. And so, I don't try to manipulate growth in any way. I just am like, I'm going to do my thing and people who need to hear it are going to hear it. And whoever, even when I post, it's like whoever needs this message, if it's a lot of people, great. If it's less people, great. I want to put it out there so that people feel heard and understood, because in turn, me writing about the type of stuff that I do, it makes me feel heard and seen. And then to have people respond to it, I'm like, oh, so it's not just me. Oh, that's cool. That's really interesting.
Here's what I love about that is that you're posting to essentially nobody, but sharing your thoughts. And it's not essentially nobody because you've had the audience, but truly like when you're sharing things that maybe aren't the popular opinion of that moment in time. Like I came into business around the same time. So I was in hustle culture territory as well. And so posting about taking care of yourself and posting about not needing to have this wildly successful life as long as you find peace and joy wasn't the popular thing for quite some time. And I found you around 2021 as well. So that must have been the time that you were really branching off. Now, you wrote the book Radically Content, Being Satisfied in an Endlessly Dissatisfied World. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a culmination of so many years of work of essentially, it's a self-help book, but it's my story too, and how I just was always delaying my happiness, thinking that my joy and I'll finally feel good enough when I get to a certain place in life. And I had this realization like in my early 30s. I'm 38 now. In my early 30s, I was like, so it's never going to happen, huh? Like I'm never going to achieve my way into happiness. I'm like, so I'm working with bad information. Like it's the cultural information. It's what they say, keep striving, keep aspiring, try to be like these people who seem to have it all together. And then behind the scenes, those people don't have it together at all. And I was just like, you know what? I don't believe this. Like I actually don't subscribe. I'm going to figure out a way to not subscribe to this, because I know that the cultural messaging is like, never be complacent, never give up, always keep grinding. And it's like, so has this made us happy? Are we happy people in the US? Like really, I've traveled a lot comparatively. No, we're not happy people. So I was like, I can't keep following the norms if I want an extraordinary life for myself, like whatever that means. And so Radically Content is essentially, it's kind of like like the most unself-help book that you could ever get, because I'm just like, actually, you know the answers. Like, it's actually in you. I'm not your guru. I'm not your expert. I'm just somebody who is going to shine a light on where maybe you're losing some of your own personal power, where you're not questioning some of the things that you're taking as absolute fact. Like, how do we feel good enough in a world that doesn't define what good enough means, where the target is ever changing? Like, even with just how to look as a woman, it just keeps changing and changing and changing. We have to keep up with these trends, keep up with all this different stuff. It's like, you never get there. And so I really just wanted to write this book as like, it's not going to give you a to-do list. It's not going to make you feel like, oh my God, I have so much more work to do. You know, so I've had some people tell me like, I'm afraid to read your book. And I'm like, don't be, it's going to make you feel so good. Like, I promise I'm not going to, you know, because people have gotten so tired of self-help and feeling like just now I have to have a 5-hour morning routine. And then I have to have a 2-hour nighttime routine. And all of this is just like endless, when I think it's more simple. You know, we need to reconnect to ourselves. We need to stop outsourcing how we're making decisions. We need to maybe get off the internet for a little bit and like actually remember what it means to be alive and in the world, and not be so chronically online. And we need to really kind of take back our definition of what a successful life is, because we shouldn't all want the same things. We should all be striving for the thing that actually makes us happy. And I really think it's a revolutionary thing to say, like, you're allowed to want more. You're allowed to be ambitious. I'm personally very ambitious. I like to do things. I'm super creative, but I also want to love my life while I'm in it, instead of saying one day when, I mean, I've done all the things. One day when your book is published. Okay. That didn't do it. One day when your other book is published. Okay. That didn't do it. One day when you're viral, when you've got the K next to your followers, when you've got this, when you've got this, it doesn't, I mean, it's a momentary excitement, of course, but it doesn't give you this lasting sense of euphoria that we think, and it doesn't make us never doubt ourselves. And so I just stopped striving for that. And I'm not to say that I don't still have that impulse and it comes up in my head, because it's everywhere, but I am always returning to, like, I have to enjoy the moment I'm in, because that's all I have. If I'm living in the past, or I'm living in like a projected future where I'll be happy when I have this and this and this and this and this, it's like that all that's doing, all that it can ensure is that you're missing the actual moment of your life that you're in. And I just got so tired of missing all my moments. I just said, that's enough. And that's really what radically content is. It's the ethos behind it.
That was so beautiful. It's so funny because I had a podcast interview a couple of months ago, and somebody asked me, what's your definition of success? And I was like, I think it's peace. I think for me right now, like, my definition is peace. I worked hard for the abundance. I got the abundance. I worked hard for the book. I got the book. I've worked hard for all these things, but I think at the end of the day, like, having quiet time with my girls and my family, like, nothing beats that for me. So it's so funny how over time, like, when you learn to shut those messages out, that we can find that contentness in our life. I love that. Now, that's actually Radically Content is being made into a feature film, I hear.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, because of the writer's strike in Hollywood, it's on pause, but before the strike, it was moving forward, and it's still moving forward, but we're just on a pause right now. But yeah, I mean, that was biggest dream ever. Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, that was another thing where it was like, this is very exciting, but you know, I actually feel like I had a really level head about it. I was like, I have to be radically content about my movie deal, because I think if I hadn't been, like, imagine this strike happening, I'd be so, if all of my worth and happiness was wrapped up in this achievement, like, then something out of my control, like a strike, would absolutely flatten me. And that's not what I want in my life. You know, I don't want, because I agree with you, my definition of success is peace. And I've always wanted, like, I do think it's possible to be successful, and in whatever way you define it, and happy. Like, I want to see that. I want to see people who are like calm and successful and actually actually enjoying their success, because I can't believe how many times I have behind the scenes conversations with people who are just like, I can't even enjoy this because I have all this pressure and I have all of this. And I'm like, so we need to all just be honest about all of this, because I mean, peace to me, there is very little in this world that I want more than peace. Like I don't think there's anything I would sacrifice my peace for.
Well, and what a great reminder though, that once we've even like locked our dreams in, that we're still in this ebb and flow state within our emotions, and that we have to be really mindful that we're in that space, that if something goes awry, it doesn't mean the dream is dead and done and over. And it doesn't say anything about who we are and what we can have or where that's ultimately going. It's just flowing with the process and saying, okay, right now in this very moment in time, this is on a pause. Doesn't mean it's not happening. Doesn't mean anything about me, but being able to just disconnect from that idea. Because I think it's so easy to look at somebody who's got a successful persona on Instagram or Facebook or whatever and be like, oh, they have all their shit together. And I think what you said earlier was true, is that I've met some people who have this big personality online and they're like not very kind in person, or, just had all these mixed feelings about different types of people that I've encountered. So it's very easy to give into the perception that people have or are living a certain way, or that it's the best way, or whatever the case might be. But bringing yourself back to it being about you, what makes you happy, what is success defined as for you, I think that's such a beautiful and powerful place to be.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think we're kind of obsessed in this culture with like the happily ever after story, in every situation. It's like your business is successful, happily ever after. You get married, happily ever after. It's like, then there's nothing left to worry about. You get the house, happily ever after. You get this. And it's like, that's extremely not what life is at all. Like I talk about how, and I tell this to myself because I am very ambitious, and I have to say like to myself that no matter what level you get to, you're just exchanging one set of problems for a different set of problems, like one of your book takes off. Okay. Now you have to like, oh gosh, I have to write something as good as that. And it's like, you got the good thing, or your book or your thing doesn't take off. And then it's like, oh no, now I'm doubting myself. And I feel like that's an indication of how good I am or not, or good enough. And it's like, you're just exchanging one thing to another. And I guess why I talk about that a lot is because it's like, it's so freeing. Like we don't have to look at other people and think that they have it all together and shame ourselves. Like that shame is really pervasive in society, especially right now, this year, after there's been a pandemic. We're still in this weird state of, are we back? Are we this? Did things change? There's this whole transformation with how people are working and all of that. And I think like, I see a lot of people who are just projecting that there's someone who's got it better. And I do think, of course, there's some things to talk about within that. There's nuance, but I don't think that comparison, especially online, is really helpful. And it's very important to just sort of demystify that there is some absolutely perfect place that you get to where you never doubt yourself, you never question anything, you never have any problems. It's like, that doesn't exist. So doesn't that just free you to like your life where you are right now and see what's working for you and see how it's kind of coming together and enjoy the journey instead of, or even just be in the journey. You don't even have to enjoy it, just be in it. And instead of constantly projecting that it would be better in some imagined future, I have the unfortunate situation where I've had all those imagined futures happen and I'm like, I still have these feelings. I'm like, all right, that's interesting. It's just like, okay, so this doesn't go away. So then I can free myself from thinking anything will take it away. So then I just be present in my life.
That's such a powerful place to be, because that's even where we can catch those stories that we're telling ourselves about the situation that we're in anyway. Like that's where we decide to accept. I think acceptance is one of the biggest neutralizers that we can create in our life, is that when we accept where we're at or what's happened and just stop fighting it, that we get our power back, because then we're not battling this imaginary shame or guilt or whatever's going on where we think we should be somewhere we're not. So I feel like acceptance is a massive part of finding present moment and living your damn life,
Right. And people people think this is something that people have said to me about Radically Content before they've read it, or, about the idea of acceptance, that it means like you're complacent and giving up. And it's like, that's not what it means. It means you can operate from a totally different, more like stable place. You can accept readily where you are, because a lot of times people are trying to, and I am people, it's like trying to overhaul, right? I am people trying to overhaul everything. I've had situations where I'm like, oh my God, I have so much to do. I got to do this. I got to catch up. I got to do this. And then I have acceptance and I'm like, oh, cool. Now I have like one thing to do, which is the thing that would actually be an effective step forward, instead of trying to just overhaul my entire life and thinking I've done everything wrong, instead of going, wait, like, cause I mean, as someone who does this inner work, like our perception of ourselves dictates everything. And we can often be thinking that we're in a life that isn't working for us. And meanwhile, it's just our mind, like basically lying to us for some weird reason, And so I think it's just so important to talk about mindset changes, even though it is obviously a lot of people talk about this, but I think I was really skeptical that changing the mindset, I was like, no, I have to like get all the things and I have to achieve. And I'm nowhere where, like, I was skeptical of self-love, because I was like, I haven't earned my love yet. So I don't think I'm allowed to love myself. I have to publish the book and be successful and be, all the things and have a very shiny life. And then I can love myself. Like, this is just a cop out, is to love myself before I've done all of that. And I was like, wow, that is a mean voice inside saying that. But then changing that whole perspective, it's like all the things that I wanted to happen just started happening when I was in that place of just like, I'm going to enjoy my life right here. And anything that I do, I'm going to do it from a place of like, let's just see what happens, instead of, oh, I hope this finally proves to me that I'm good enough.
I think there's such a difference between, and the intention behind what you're doing and why. And I think getting cozy with that notion of, am I doing this for what? Like, who am I doing this for? What am I doing this for? And what's the intention behind it? Is it to prove my worth? What happens if I just love myself now? And I think the thing that really jacks people up with self-love is that it's an in the moment feeling. It's the way you speak to yourself. It's the way you take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis. And I think people feel like it's also a destination when it's not. It's a daily practice. Right. So when we get into that habit of showing up for ourselves daily, like that's a game changer. And when we show up for ourselves daily and we love ourselves daily, sure, there's things and desires that we'll always have, but we don't need them in the same way as if our intention was to prove ourselves from it.
That's such a good point, because it really is. I say it as like self-love is an action. I mean, love in general is an action. Like, even if we look at our friendships, we don't just go, yeah, that's it. I never have to show up for you or answer your calls or basically anything. Relationships, family, anything, it all takes, it's like, yeah, it's a constant action in showing up. And I think of like self-love as like listening to yourself for sure, for real. And that's because for me, in all my personal relationships, when people listen to me, I feel loved. So I'm like, that's the same with myself. And yet for years, I was shutting down the part of me that wanted to be heard and listened to. And instead of, just demanding like, okay, you do this, you got to be productive, you got to be this. It was like, well, wouldn't it be nice if I just said to myself, like, hey, how do you feel? Like, what's going on today? And like, connecting to myself on a daily basis. I think you're completely right. I mean, I think of self-love like that as well. I don't even think I consciously think of it, because it's so ingrained now that absolutely nothing is a destination, because there's just always going to be the next challenge. There's always going to be, once you peel like a part of your healing down, there's something else there and it gets easier because you're less likely to resist it. Like if we're resisting it, it makes it all a lot harder. But I think like getting it out of my head that there's going to be some magical destination that I arrive at where it's just complete peace. It's like, I get into like super spiritual texts, and if even like the most spiritual people who have, even they talk about resistance and ego and mental blocks and stuff, I'm like, okay, so I'm good. I can't expect this. Like, if they don't have it figured out, I'm not going to have it figured out. So I just need to let the pressure off of myself.
I remember reading about Mother Teresa writing about having a dark night of the soul, like in the midst of like her most well-known work. And I was like, okay, I'm good. Like,
Right. Like,
we're okay over here. One of the things that I think about, I love what you just said. I absolutely love what you just said, because when we talk about healing, like healing isn't a destination either. And when we're talking about all of this, it's not, the goal isn't to never have a bad day or to be perfect all the time and to be in a perfect mood all the time. It's to know how to get yourself into a better spot on the times you do have a bad day, so a bad day doesn't turn into a bad week or a bad month. And it can be that easy, and it can be that simpler, where we just learn to love ourselves in that moment, in that day, learn to take care of ourselves in the moment and in that day, and get ourselves to a place where we feel like we're capable of taking on the next day as it comes.
right.
I am currently reading your latest debut novel, Main Character Energy. And so, not to entirely switch gears, but this is actually making me think of Poppy and how Poppy really starts off. Poppy is the main character of this fantastic book. You guys have to get this. It's such an easy read, Jamie. Like, it's so well done, easy read. It's like, I hate books with too much detail where it doesn't give me a chance to visualize how I'm seeing it. It's absolutely just well written. But Poppy really starts off the book on the sidelines of her life. She's watching it all happen in a very pessimistic, almost cynical way. I'm curious where her character was created from, and how that looked for you, creating a character that starts off in that direction.
I mean, I think it's kind of cliche. It's like, art follows life, but that's how I used to be, a lot, it surprises people because it's really not how I am now. And I'm like, the power of change, like the power of growth and healing, believe me, because her inner world was a lot like mine. And so there was a lot of me that I put into that. And yeah, I mean, I think it was a risk. Some people I've seen, and they're like, I had a hard time with Poppy in the beginning. Like, she's very down on herself. I mean, you have a book called Main Character Energy. You want her to be like empowered and in her life, and she's really not. And it was a very intentional choice for me to make her sort of maddening. Like, I toned her down even, because at first, like the first draft, I was like, she is depressing, and like, that's fine, but that's a different book, if it goes too far. But I just really, I think why I wanted to emphasize it so much was because I was like, the right people that read this book are going to go, wow, this is a mirror, because I don't like it when I see it on the page in someone else. But that's how my mind is, because a lot of, especially women, we are honestly so hard on ourselves. It's actually wild, and we keep it all inside. It's kind of wild. I don't think most people would know. And I just get a glimpse. Poppy was also me, but also a lot of the women that message me, that I would get on Instagram or before on Facebook. And I couldn't believe the depth of how awful they were to themselves, even though I did believe it. But it was like, it wasn't just one, it was hundreds of women being like, why do I say this to myself? Why is my inner dialogue like this? And so I was like, I guess I got to write somebody that is going to be a real mirror to a lot of women. And I think that that's a powerful place, because I've noticed in a lot of novels, and it's fine, we don't always have to have a deep read. We can sometimes just read things for escape, and that's great. But I wanted this to be as much about where she goes in her journey. Like, she does go to the French Riviera, but even that, it was like the juxtaposition, because, there's so many people. I went to the French Riviera and I spent a year in France, and people would tell me like all the time, they were like, as if you ever have a bad day in France. Like, you're in France. Oh, if I was in France, I wish I could. And I'm like, I had plenty of bad days. Like, I promise you, I could have I could have a bad day in front of the Eiffel Tower. Trust me, like, it doesn't, wherever you go, there you are. Your bad days are in your head mostly. So I loved that juxtaposition where she's in one of the most beautiful places in the world. She's just been given this gift she could inherit all of this. I mean, this is not a spoiler. It's in the synopsis. And she still doesn't see it. Like she doesn't see it so much that she sees it actually as like, she's mad. She's mad at her aunt for like bringing her there. She's like, I wanted to give up. Like I wanted to not have any hope. I didn't want to like, she's kind of prickly in that sense. And I felt like it was really important to write it that way, even though it can frustrate certain people. I'm like, well, then, that's what art is. We have to allow it to be a mirror, and we have to see it illuminated in some way. And that inner journey was so important to me, of her just starting out so down on herself, the way that I have talked to hundreds of women that they feel the same way. And I'm like, well, then let's show it. Let's show it on the page of her having, how does she find that inner strength? Where does it come from? And does it come from everything is perfect and it all works out? No, there's plenty of things that have to happen for her to get that inner strength and resilience. And I just felt like I just wanted to show imperfect but strong women on the page. I had such a vision for it. And it's really cool. You write, so I've worked on it for 3 years, but to write something that then it goes out into the world and people pick up on your nuances and they're like, I see the thread. I see how this like is so much of your work that I've already known, and all of this. It's just like, it's an unbelievable experience to see people interacting with it and seeing themselves in Poppy. I mean, I don't know that I expected people to love Poppy so much, because I was like, I've had so many people tell me like, this is just such a fun, uplifting read. And I'm like, oh my God, here I was thinking like I wrote a super depressing book. I was like, I didn't realize I had written a joyful book, but I guess, now that I can see it, I'm like, oh, we want to see. That's something that when I was studying a lot of craft books, which is so funny because when I was studying craft books, it actually about like how to write really great main characters. It actually made me really at peace with myself, because the whole thing is like, you don't want a perfect person. You want someone who has flaws, who is trying and failing. Like that's how you root for someone. And I was like, oh, what if I can apply that to my life? Like that's how you can root for yourself, like how you're resilient. It's not, how do you get it all perfect always? That's not really where confidence comes from.
Yeah, Poppy is all of us. Poppy, when you're reading this book, and again, I'm going to link all of the links in my show notes, but when you're reading this book, it is frustrating. It is frustrating to watch her doubt. Everything is frustrating to let her cave into the perceptions of other people. There is this big conversation with her mom and her mom's disapproval or criticism of her. There's that battle of her body image and how that plays out in her success, and the stories of how that plays out in the success. There's that comparative success with her brother and her brother's major success. And there's all of these things that we're all experiencing, the easy comparisons with the people that we, admire or look up to versus where we're at. And maybe the stories that our parents have passed down to us about ourselves or how we work in the world or what we can be or who we can be. And so we're really watching this story unfold and watching Poppy eradicate limiting beliefs. But so many people can relate to that because we're all having stories that we get to choose what we're going to do with. And she's such a beautiful reminder that we get to choose what to do with them. And it's different being on the outside reading in than being the person who's like, well, I'm this way because, I just thought it was well done in almost a self-help style without intentionally being self-help.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I actually had dinner with a friend the other day, and like a really insightful friend. And she was like, I'm reading your book and I just feel like, did you mean for it to be like a fictionalized self-help journey? I was like, no. I mean, people are saying to me, they're like, this is like a fiction radically content. And what's so crazy is like, I wrote this novel before I wrote Radically Content. So I'm just like, there was some magic going on here, because first of all, if you set out to write a quote unquote self-help novel, it's going to be bad. Like that's just, it has to come naturally. Like it has to come through in like the organic, otherwise it's going to be preachy. It's going to be annoying. And I just am, I don't want to write something like that. So there's no way that I set out for that, but I set out for her inner journey for sure. I guess that had been something that as a reader for so long, it would always frustrate me that there was so many books that were so fixated and focused on the external journey, which is, I get it. You got to have a book, there has to be things that happen, but I'd be like, what is the character thinking? Like, or why are they like that? Like, at least with Poppy, that she has all of this, you're like, you get why, like these are real
Can't be
things.
mad at her.
Yeah, you could, well, like, and you can, because that's
Good.
fine, but some people are, but that's fine too. But I think that understanding why she is the way that she is, and if you have the courage to see that she's a mirror for a lot of your own insecurities and things that were fed constantly, like, she's to me a character who's very much in the world of like a 2023, where there's just so much pressure to look a certain way. There's so much pressure to show up a certain way. There's like just so much pressure in general to, you can feel so ashamed if you're in your 30s and you haven't achieved certain things yet. I mean, she's very current. And I thought that having her go through an internal journey in a sort of like self-helpy way, it's a more subtle and abstract way to experience that kind of teaching. And that kind of, because for me, there have been so many years where the progress, yes, an external thing had happened, but the inner progress was what was so like fascinating to me. Like the moment that I started, for example, like the moment that I decided that I was going to be consistent instead of like good enough, the only thing I had to focus on was just being consistent. It actually changed my life, not because then I got all the things and then I was happy. It was like, no, I actually saw my own strength, and it built confidence that I didn't have before. And it made me realize like I can actually take on bigger dreams because I know how to actually work on them. And it wasn't from a like, really, I got to be productive or I don't have any worth in the world. It was just like, this is how I show devotion to myself. This is how I love myself, is by showing up on a daily basis. And I was like, there's not a lot of people talking about this. We're always saying that the thing that's going to give us confidence or make us feel good is getting these things. But in actuality, what I found is like the walk that I take every day is like the most important thing that I do for myself, because it, makes me feel like I'm showing up for myself daily. It's my way of being present. It's my way of creating clarity. It's my way of caring for myself. And I'm like, and yet I've been told over and over and over that unless you are a multimillionaire on a jet doing this, you shouldn't feel that way about yourself. But it's like, I reject that. And I think that was, I felt frustrated until I started sharing that inner journey. And then I started connecting with people over that. But I felt frustrated that type of work was not acknowledged enough. So I was like, I guess I'll just write a whole novel about how her the character's inner journey. And we're going to celebrate that. And we're going to see like how that changes her whole life is from the inside out.
I love what you said about consistency, because I think so, even for me personally, that's been a journey. It's been a journey to be consistent. And for the longest time, I just identified as a type B personality and somebody who just was never consistent, because that was me. And it took a long time for me to get really serious about breaking that identity barrier of like deciding that isn't who I am, and that consistency is progress, and that makes me feel really good about myself, and that makes me feel good about what I'm putting out into the world, and it makes me feel good in my life with my kids, and it just makes me feel good to show up in a way that feels really good and authentic. So I love that. The book's called Main Character Energy. For somebody who is sitting on the sidelines of their life, what would you suggest for them to get into their main character energy?
Good question. I mean, I would say like, honestly, it doesn't have to be big. Like, I think that it can be identifying like the one thing, just what you're talking about, like how it feels good to show up for yourself, even if it's like 30 minutes, a couple times a week. Like, identify that one thing that you're putting off that is calling to you, and give it space to breathe. Like, put it in the schedule, make it non-negotiable. I think a lot of people, we end up being on the sidelines because we start losing ourselves and losing the desire to even dream anymore, to even think about what we want. And all of my stuff that I've ever done, it comes from like Main Character Energy, the book. I sat down to write that being like, let's just assume this won't be published. Just just so I could get out of my head, you know? And that made me feel so good just writing it, like seeing the words stack up, seeing the time and energy, just even if it was bad, the first draft was not good. But I think like it never, yeah. And like just that though was so important to me that everything else just felt like we'll see what happens. And so I think like often we can feel very much on the sidelines and we think like, oh my God, I'm going to have to like have a whole new life, leave everything behind. No, I mean, you can, if you want to do that, like, and that feels really good. Go ahead. You know, I'm a big fan of the move across the country, do whatever you want type of big moves. But I think if that's, you don't want to do that, I really just think like what we've been talking about, where self-love and honoring yourself is not really just about like saying nice things to yourself in the mirror. Like, it's just like, do nice things, do a couple nice things a week for yourself and start building that momentum. And then you're not going to feel as though you're like just existing in other people's stories. You're actually like, I think a lot of people are waiting for permission to matter, and they're waiting for permission from someone else to come down and say, you're good enough, babe. Like, you get to matter. But the whole hard part about it is that like the only way that really happens is if we give that permission to ourselves first. And we need to actually be the ones, that's the internal shift. That to me is a very big internal shift that Poppy experiences, of like, no one's going to do this for me. I have to take the action every day or in some consistent way, because no one's coming to give permission. Everyone else is dealing with their own stuff. And I think that's probably why people really idealize maybe celebrity or achievement in that way, because they think it's giving that person permission. But most likely they already gave that permission to themselves. They gave that permission to themselves to go after their dreams, to be seen, to be, you know, look like, to do the things that matter to them. And I think that that's the way you step into main character energy. It's not like best life on a boat. Like, I mean, that can be, but I'm just saying that that's like the Instagram version of it. But the real version is like giving yourself the permission to matter, and that what you want matters. What's calling to you matters. You don't have to make it into anything. Like, remember hobbies, remember things that we just did because we liked it, you know, like do that. Even with books. I mean, I don't know if this is still happening, but I feel like people, even they'll go like, oh, this is my like guilty pleasure, or I never tell anyone I read this. It's like, read what you love, listen to what you love, you know, like that's main character energy too. Just like accept and love what you love, you know, and not think of what everyone else will think of it or what it's going to mean. You know, all of that is, I mean, that was a lot because I went off, but like, I don't know.
I loved it. And I want to repeat it, because give yourself permission to matter, giving yourself permission to matter. That's the quote of the day, because I think a lot of people need to hear that. And it's so funny because when I was writing Rock Your Comeback, I just remember thinking like, I'm writing this for me loud enough for other people to hear it. Like, that's all I had.
Oh.
Like, that is all I have. I'm writing this for me loud enough for other people to hear it. And I don't care. It'll reach whoever it needs to reach, but I'm so detached from the outcome in a way that feels so good to me, is that I know I put something out into the world that is a positive reflection of my journey. And if it helps one other person, fuck yeah. You know, like that's what I got. But this has been such a special conversation, and I'm so grateful for you taking the time. Is there anything else on your heart before we close out today?
I don't think so. I really loved this conversation. It was felt very soul filled. So thank you for having me.
That makes me so happy. You guys are gonna want to connect with Jamie. I will link everything in the show notes so that you can get a hold of her. Make sure you pick up her books, Radically Content and Main Character Energy. And so grateful for you. Thanks again for stopping by.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Nicole.